Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, and for the last time a British Tornado fighter flies off on patrol, scanning the skies over occupied Iraq and liberated Kuwait for any sign of the Iraqi Air Force. Today, after more than 3 months in the desert, the crews from RAF Coningsby are finally on their way home. The Lincolnshire base contributed 200 personnel to operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm. For the ground crew, now with little to do but pack up, there's time to reflect.
The memory that sticks in my mind is the Scud attacks and the Patriots launching as we ran for the shelters. That will definitely stick in my mind.
Probably my biggest memory is when there was a group of us outside the crew room and we saw the first Patriot take off, which was like we were standing there for about 10 seconds trying to figure out what it was before we realised it was a Patriot. Then it was all mayhem.
To me, it was like a long exercise with some bangs in it, and that was it. But always at the back of your mind was the thought that, has that one got chemicals in it or not?
The Tornado F3 is the RAF's most sophisticated fighter, the modern-day successor to the Spitfire. Equipped with air-to-air missiles, its role in the war is to hunt and destroy enemy planes. Coningsby's air crews and support staff were in before the beginning of the war and still here after the end. On the ground, they were subjected to Scud attacks. In the air, they came under fire from Iraqi Akak. But in all the missions flown, not one F3 fighter fired a shot in anger. But while the fighters may not have fired at the enemy, they certainly saw action.
We've been shot at a couple of times. For me, it means action. Obviously, we haven't been shot at quite as much as the GR1s, which obviously have had a much harder time than we have. But where we've been capping, i.e. patrolling, it's been over the enemy lines, in fact most of the time in Iraq itself. And obviously the threat was there the whole time to get shot at, and personally I think we got shot at on a couple of occasions, once by SAMs and once by air-to-air artillery.
In a way perhaps some people are frustrated, but personally I'm not. We actually were involved in one intercept against a helicopter, and at the time we were very, very frustrated that we didn't get a shot away. But looking back at it, it's a horrific thought to think we might have killed somebody, and I know war is about killing people, but if you actually think about it, that you've actually killed somebody, and they're no different to me and my front seater. It's not a nice thought, although we would do it. I mean, I have no qualms about doing it, but it'd certainly be difficult living with yourself afterwards, I think.
Since the ceasefire, pilots on patrol have taken the opportunity to examine closely the country they helped liberate.
Just the wide-scale destruction, certainly over Kuwait, the huge amount of mess as far as crashed vehicles, bomb sites, the burning oil wells, which obviously people back home have seen as well. Really vast amounts of destruction, which really goes from horizon to horizon, and you can't avoid the fact that there's been an awful lot of awful mess created by the whole thing, which I suppose will take years and years and years to sort out.
When you fly over Kuwait, we've all seen footage of the burning oil wells, but you only seen a small amount of it. When you actually fly around it, there's not a mile goes by where you don't see a bomb crater. I mean, there's just total devastation.
The Dhahran detachment of RAF fighters is made up of 18 Tornadoes, most from Coningsby, but also from RAF Lucas in Scotland and Leeming in Yorkshire. For the pilots and support staff, war wasn't the only new experience. Saudi Arabia itself came as something of a shock, a country where religion dictates that alcohol is forbidden and even bacon sandwiches banned.
It's not the best nightlife in the world. Glad to get back to Britain anyway. Back to normal life.
Everybody's just living for the day we get home, really. See our wives, children, and have a couple of beers.
Yes, looking forward to getting back to England's wet, windy, horrible place though it is. It's a lot better than out here.
When battle honours are awarded, the Tornado fighter will take second place to the Tornado bomber, the plane which flew low over enemy airfields and sustained the most losses. But the part played by the men and machines from Coningsby and its sister stations is not to be underestimated.
They kept the skies clear, effectively. Once we'd hit him so hard, and I'm talking about the enemy when I say him, in the initial days, he still had the potential to get airborne all for weeks to come. But the fact that we had aircraft like the F3s and the F15s literally sweeping the skies clear, it gave the bombers and the recce airplanes complete free range. Of course, they were still doing a hazardous job with missiles and ground fire, but at least they didn't have the added worry of fighter aircraft from the enemy, and that was wholly the F3s and the F15's job.
The departure today of the first British Tornado fighters signals the breakup of the huge Allied airbase at Dhahran, a unique chapter in air history marked by a remarkable lineup. 120 planes from 4 nations, Britain, America, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. And taking the salute, Prince Sultan, the brother of the Saudi king. The first of the returning planes will arrive at Coningsby tomorrow. By the end of the week, all RAF fighters and bombers based in the Gulf are expected to be home. Before the war, this was unthinkable, a Christian service in Islamic Saudi Arabia. As thoughts turn to those who won't return home, the quiet desert breeze was once again shattered. The first Tornado bomber was on its way back to Britain. The creation of the huge multinational airbase at Dhahran was one of the key elements in the Allied war plan. From here, more than 200 British, American, Saudi and Kuwaiti combat planes flew on round-the-clock missions, one of the biggest ever concentrations of airborne firepower. The King Abdulaziz Air Base has been home to 1,400 RAF personnel, 37 fighters, bombers and reconnaissance planes. The boss of the British detachment, Group Captain Cliff Spink. In peacetime, the base commander at RAF Coningsby in Lincolnshire. From his air-conditioned porter cabin, he worked, ate, drank and slept while his men went into battle.
We're all delighted that we've brought it to this sort of conclusion, and a deal of elation that it has been so successful.
Okay, we're coming up to rotate now.
In Group Captain Spink's charge, 3 different versions of the Tornado, the fighter, the bomber and the reconnaissance plane. These are the aircraft which fly alone, unarmed and unafraid, low over enemy territory, spotting Scud missile sites. Ensuring the Scud hunters are ready to fly, Sergeant Kick Holtby from Lincoln.
On our first mission, first operational war mission, we actually located some Scud launchers, which were suddenly taken out pretty quick.
Despite the danger, not one of the Scud hunters was shot down, but the war did claim 2 other aircraft from the RAF's Dhahran detachment. One GR bomber crashed during training before hostilities broke out, killing both crew members. Another was shot down over enemy territory, its pilot and navigator taken prisoner. In the operations room that night, Colin Buxton from Nottingham.
Unfortunately, I was the one that got the message, it's the one message you didn't want. It's absolute dejection, really. There's not much you could do about it. You felt completely helpless and you couldn't get on to anybody to find out any more until the crews landed, which was something like an hour and a half after we'd had the original message.
They may have trained for it, but finding themselves in the firing line still came as a shock to many of the airmen. Adam Robinson from Mansfield in Nottinghamshire is a Tornado navigator.
We were frightened on probably most, I'd be silly to say, not all, it'd be silly to say most of the trips, it'd be all of the trips that we were. You get in the cockpit and you think, what am I doing here? I don't need to do this, I joined the Air Force to fly, I didn't join to get shot at. But that's part and parcel of the job, and so we were frightened.
Even though some of the British and American aircraft have now returned home, the lineup of Allied combat planes at Dhahran still stretches almost as far as the eye can see. The Saudis and Kuwaitis are now saying farewell to their comrades in arms. For the British, a goodbye party. An aircraft hangar assumed the appearance of a Bedouin tent for some traditional Arab hospitality. The host, the Saudi base commander, a member of the royal family.
I think every one of us have gained a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience that is going to count for a lot of things later on. There is a lot of lesson learned, a lot of strategies, a lot of tactics that's been learned, and we really value this kind of experience.
The Allied airbase at Dhahran will without doubt have a place in the history books. In the long term, the lessons learned will have a profound effect on the planning of future air campaigns. And in the short term, the British airmen who served here also have much to ponder.
I think probably initially there will be a feeling of anticlimax when they go back home. and it may be rather difficult in the early days for them to readjust following the experiences which they have undergone here. But I would hope that, being professional servicemen, it will not leave any kind of permanent scar on them.
The first of the British fighters and bombers have already left for home. The ground crews and support staff will follow over the next few weeks. After 7 months, the RAF presence at the King Abdulaziz Air Base at Dhahran is drawing to a close. The 5-star Marriott Hotel in Riyadh, and more than 2 weeks after the end of the war, most of the guests are in uniform. The Marriott remains one of the more luxurious billets. Half an hour's drive away, Riyadh International Airport, the home of the Allied transport and tanker fleets. Terminal 4 was never finished, built for the tourists visiting a country where there's no alcohol, no nightlife. The tourists are still awaited, but it's an ideal staging post for Allied troops. Throughout the war, the apron outside was the home to 101 Tanker Squadron, the linchpin of the Allied air campaign. Day and night, these converted VC-10s met up with fighters and bombers on mission after mission. One crew member from Melton Mowbray in Leicestershire says he'll never forget the first night of the war.
Walking out to the jet that night, we had very little notice that we were going, and certainly adrenaline, I think, was the main thing. It was quite unbelievable on the first night.
The tanker crews are some of the unsung heroes of war, but their role is crucial. The British commander of the Allied fighter and bomber base at Dhahran is Group Captain Cliff Spink from RAF Coningsby in Lincolnshire.
Well, the tankers have been absolutely fundamental to the operational role. Without the refuelling aircraft and their crews giving us the range to go deep into Iraq to attack those targets, and indeed to give us the fuel to get us home at the end of the mission, we just simply couldn't have done the job.
The fighters and bombers are beginning to fly home, but the work of the RAF isn't over yet. At the big bases of Riyadh and Dhahran, the airlift of troops and equipment has only just begun. It'll be weeks before the last kitchen tent is packed away, the last cook and cargo handler able to wave goodbye to the desert sun. The airlift is underway, a job for the RAF's Tri-Stars. These multi-role giants carry passengers and freight. They'll return the troops, and in their tanker capacity, they'll relay home the remaining fighters and bombers. The Americans are homeward bound too, on Starlifters and the huge C-5 Galaxy, the largest US transport plane. There's plenty of work also for the Hercules, the RAF's veteran workhorse. They've flown thousands of missions for Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm.
All the forces which have been deployed for the last few months have got to be recovered back to England, and the Hercules would take a pretty big part in that. So I would think we're going to be fairly busy for the next 3 or 4 months at least.
The combat sorties may have ended, but the RAF's involvement in the Gulf is far from over.